So could you please first introduce yourself?
I'm Professor Dame Elizabeth Anionwu, and I'm an emeritus, that means retired, emeritus Professor of Nursing at the University of West London, where I still have a link.
Tell me, Elizabeth, what actually first got you interested in nursing? What was the first catalyst?
First of all, people will be surprised to hear that I actually spent the first 9 years of my life in a children's home. And whilst I was there, I think I might have been about 4 or 5, I had very bad eczema. And there was this wonderful nun, I used to call her the white nun. In fact, all the nuns were white, but all the others wore black habits. This particular nun wore a white habit, and she looked after my painful eczema dressings incredibly well. And she would use what we'd call now distraction therapy. She would use what I thought as a small child that a holy woman, such as a nun, would use words that I didn't think they should use, such as bottom. And what she was doing, she was making me laugh every single time. It never failed. And while I was laughing, she would whip off the dressings, no pain whatsoever, apply the cool lotion, and reapply the bandages. Do you know, I just thought she was the most wonderful woman on earth. And later on, I discovered she was something called a nurse. And that's when I decided to be one, and I've never regretted that decision.
And I understand you've written a book about the subject?
Yes, I've written a book about my memoirs, which I've called Mixed Blessings from a Cambridge Union, because actually I was the outcome of an affair of 2 students at Cambridge University just after the Second World War. They didn't get married, and my mother was from a devout Irish heritage Catholic family. She was doing extremely well, studying classics at Newnham College, and all she would tell my grandparents was that my father was a fellow student. He was actually Nigerian and studying law at Trinity Hall, but they didn't know anything about his origins, and it wasn't until after I was born that they discovered that I was a brown baby. And so there's a lot of ups and downs with my upbringing, and yet my life has turned out incredibly well. In fact, when I give talks about my life, I call them breaking through despite the barriers, because life really has turned out very well for me.
What do you think is the best thing about nursing as a career?
The best thing about nursing is always when you see the impact you have on patients or families, because I have nursed both in the hospitals, on the wards, but more in the community when I visited families as a health visitor or as a specialist sickle cell nurse. And it's just their feedback, both physically, when you see that just making the bed more comfortable for them, or bathing them in a very sensitive, careful way so that they're not in more pain, or giving them advice about an illness so that they can cope with it better. And the feedback is absolutely incredible.
Can you just explain very briefly what sickle cell is?
Sickle cell anemia is an inherited condition of the red blood cells that must be inherited from both parents, who are usually healthy carriers. The child or adult that has the illness, though, is subject to periodic episodes of mild to excruciating pain. And fortunately, though, more and more people are living well into middle age or older than that these days.
I know you've been inspired by Mary Seacole and her story. I know you were very much part of a whole group trying to get a statue which now has been erected. Can you just talk to me about Mary Seacole and the Mary Seacole Trust and why you felt it was so essential to honour her name?
Mary Seacole was a Victorian woman of colour from Jamaica, of Jamaican and Scottish origin, and she became famous during the period of the Crimean War, where she went on her own account because she couldn't get sponsorship in London. And the newspapers of the time recorded how she would go onto the battlefield, as well as run her own British hotel, as she called it. And she called the British soldiers her sons. She didn't have any children of her own. And those sons, those soldiers, absolutely revered her. In the same way that they revered Florence Nightingale, who was more of a hospital administrator.